I thank the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Jordan. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. One thing that was raised earlier was a little bit about how 15 years ago the DOJ may have gotten a little bit politicized. I think Mr. Terwilliger, you were referencing that. I served in the Department of Justice about 15 years ago, right on the number, when I was a special assistant United States attorney. And one thing that I would note, Jack Smith has been at the center of a lot of these issues and debates in terms of lawfare. Obviously, that's in the federal context. When he entered his role as special counsel, Smith had already had a pattern of targeting Republican politicians. For example, in 2013, when he served as the head of DOJ's public integrity section, Jack Smith encouraged his subordinates to contact IRS official Lois Lerner to discuss how the federal government could bring charges against conservative nonprofit organizations. Was that a depoliticized Department of Justice, Mr. Terwilliger?
No, sir, and you've hit right on it. When you just use your common sense to look at what's happened. When you see some of the former prosecutors that were involved in some of these cases showing up as commentators on MSNBC, spouting political rhetoric, you don't have to be a genius to figure out what happened at the department.
It's not the only example, right? We can go down Lois Lerner, we can go down a whole bunch of different possibilities. How about Eric Holder himself with Fast and Furious? It wasn't like the Department of Justice was, looking to go dive deeply into what was going on with respect to specifically what Eric Holder did.
I love that example, Mr. Roy, because can you imagine if Pam Bondi stood up today and described herself as Donald Trump's wingman, as Eric Holder described himself for President Obama?
Well, you can see why I was only a special assistant U.S. attorney for a couple of years during the Holder era and decided to move on and work for Governor Perry down in Austin. Let me tell you something. Let me ask you this question. You cited the two members of the 11th Circuit panel, right? And they concurred in the result, but they raised this issue. Is that right?
That's correct. And
the issue they raised, I'm quoting, is, quote, in short, foreclosing removal when states prosecute former federal officers simply for performing their official duties can allow a rogue state's weaponization of the prosecution power to go unchecked and fester, end quote. Is that a correct quotation?
Correct. Yes, sir.
You share that concern, do you not?
Absolutely.
Could you just describe a little bit, I mean, we've discussed it at some length here, but as we take up this legislation, at the heart of it lies the question that was going on here in the exchange between, I think, the ranking member and Professor Besky and some others about the job and the nature of the job. And so if you're in the case of your client, the chief of staff to the President of the United States, and the President of the United States asks you to set up a call, and there is the inherent blend between official and political in what we do, right? And so something is, something we seem as official, you're the chief of staff, you're working through it, and then there's some political questions that come up. So how is it that we can proceed if we don't have clarity with respect to the actual job, with respect to how you were describing that earlier? Could you expand on that a little bit?
Well, I would submit to you, Mr. Roy, that there is absolute clarity in terms of that job. In 1939, Congress passed a statute and said, okay, we're authorizing assistants to the president. Never existed before. Before that, they had always been borrowed from agencies and brought into the White House. Presidential assistants were authorized by Congress, and Congress said their duties shall, quote, be as prescribed by the president. So when the president asks you to make a phone call, you're acting within the scope of your office.
Do you think it would be good for the country, were it to be true, that, for example, some, pretty aggressive district attorneys in South Texas, or maybe in working coordination with the Attorney General of Texas, decided to say, you know what, we think that the actions of, maybe it was DH Secretary Mayorkas, maybe it was the Attorney General, maybe their actions in leaving the borders wide open to endanger Texans was actually in violation of law. Maybe they should be prosecuted under Texas law because of what they did to the people of the state of Texas, the people in my district who are no longer alive, the people who have suffered the $11 billion we've had to spend in Texas. Do you think it's a good direction for us to go to have it such that state DAs and state attorneys general can then go after officials in their carrying out their official capacity and the ranges around that official capacity? Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? And do you think it's important for us to clarify that law?
It's a terrible thing to go in that direction, but that's the direction it's going. And it is inevitable that the worm will turn and there will be Democrat officials of political appointees who will be subject of just the kind of action you describe. This is a place for Congress to assert itself and say, just as the title of this statute says, we want to try to end this kind of lawfare. We may not be able to do it completely, we may not be able to do it perfectly, but it's a very, very important step.
Thank you, Mr. Twilliger, and thank you, the witnesses. I think the chairman of the committee seeks recognition.
If I could, if the chair would indulge, I have one other question.
I would be happy to.
Give an extra question to the ranking